Okay, so that is the official dong to get started. Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. This is the What is Environmental Justice webinar hosted by the Delaware Center for the Inland Basin and Clean Water Delaware's Clear Choice campaign. So this is actually part of a Water Warriors workshop series as part of the Clean Water campaign, which we'll touch on in just a moment. But for starters, my name is Lisa Swenger. I serve as the Outreach and Education Coordinator at the Center. And tonight I'm really excited to introduce to you some of our guest speakers. But before we get there, I just wanted to go over a few housekeeping items. So first, as you could hear, this meeting is being recorded, and that is so that we can share it with individuals that weren't able to join us tonight. Secondly, if everyone could remain in mute mode throughout the duration of the presentations. And if you have any questions, feel free to type it away in the chat box. At the end, we will open the floor up for questions and answers, but that just helps us as we move through the process. So without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to our Executive Director, Chris Basin, to kick off tonight's session.
Thanks, Lisa. I'm Chris Basin. I'm the Executive Director with the Center for the Inland Basin. And for those of you who are new to the Center, I just want to give you a brief introduction of who we are and what we do. We're a private nonprofit organization, and we're located at the Indian River Inlet in Sussex County. And our job is to protect and restore Rehoboth Bay, Indian River Bay, and Little Assaultman Bays. And those are Delaware's inland bays. They are extremely economically and ecologically important water bodies, but they have a long history of pollution. So that's why we were created as an organization about 25 years ago to bring the community together to solve the environmental problems that we're facing. And together we've had a great deal of success. The bays are a lot healthier than they were in the past years, and they're getting healthier. What we're doing together is working. Our areas of mission focus on science and research, understanding the bays and how they're changing, water quality restoration and fish and wildlife habitat restoration, education and outreach to the public, and we also do policy work. And so as we were chatting about getting started, today was a big day yesterday was a big day for the Center. The Clean Water for Delaware Act passed the Senate. And that has been about a 6-year process to get that going, working with the legislature and to get it passed. And Delaware Nature Society, who is a member of the Clean Water Alliance and really the lead of that effort to pass the bill, deserves a lot of credit for the work that they did. The bill's had a lot of iterations, and in this last iteration, Delaware Nature Society made sure in there that the funds in the Clean Water Trust set up by the bill would be directed towards lower income communities and underserved communities. And I think that's a really important addition. We, in our watershed, have a large diversity of communities. Particularly around the Millsboro area, we have a lot of Latinx communities, Nanticoke Indian tribe, and immigrant communities. And I think it's important that we acknowledge that those lower income communities in general tend to have higher pollution loads and higher burdens associated with that. And they also tend to have less access to planning and decision-making and enforcement. And that's something that really needs to change. It's something that we really need to focus on as an organization. And so I'm happy that we're talking about environmental justice tonight. For me personally, my introduction to environmental justice came by learning about the wastewater disaster at the Mount Air poultry processing facility on the Indian River. And I grew up in Newcastle, and it turns out our speaker tonight, Michele, she grew up in Wilmington, so we grew up not far from each other. And growing up in Newcastle, air and water pollution is just part of everybody's life. PCBs and TCEs and Superfund sites and oil spills and tire fires and the Amoco chemical plant exploding. That's just kind of part of the history of people that grew up there. But Michele and I had very different experiences dealing with that pollution, different degrees of pollution, and how we were heard in trying to address that pollution. And I think that gets to a very important part of environmental justice, is that all people need to be treated equal at every level of decision making when addressing a clean environment and pollution, whether that's planning, implementation, funding, and enforcement. And so at the center, we are seeking to understand and adopt those values. And again, I'm very pleased Michele is with us here tonight to talk about that. So I'd like to introduce Michele now. She is the National Co-Coordinator at the Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform. She is a Wilmington, Delaware native, and she has provided capacity support, organizing, and tech assistance on the connection between chemicals management, oil and gas, energy, and toxics exposure and legacy. She's an accomplished author. She co-authored Environmental Justice for Delaware, Mitigating Toxic Pollution in Newcastle County Communities. And Michele is currently living in Washington, D.C. And she was recently appointed to the White House Environmental Justice Advisory Council under the Biden administration. So I understand she's doing great work there, and there's a lot of very promising things coming out of that and the work that she's doing. So we're really pleased, Michele, that you're here tonight, and really looking forward to your story. Thank you for being here, Michele.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Hello, everyone. How are you tonight? You will find that I'm a very interactive kind of person. My name is Michele Roberts, as you heard. I'm the National Co-Coordinator of the Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform. We are a network of grassroots environmental and economic justice communities across this nation, one of which is located here in Delaware, the Delaware Concerned Residents for Environmental Justice. I'm so pleased to be here tonight with you. It's so awesome to be home. It's so awesome to come to Sussex. It's so awesome in so many ways. And I want to begin tonight, if we can, given that there's been great success, but we would be remiss if I would not acknowledge the land by which we are on. Even though I'm in Washington, D.C., I'm here, yes, with our Native brothers and sisters in the Washington, Piscataway, our Nanico, our Lenape. If we just make sure we acknowledge our folks. And then I want to take us into a deeper meditation on what it is of water, our connection to water, the beauty and the thanksgiving for the fact that that bill was passed today. Because from water we all came, from water we were all created, from water we are all nourished, and from water we are all nurtured. I want to give thanks for our dear beloved Harriet Tubman, Absalom Jones, and Richard Allen. Through the waters, they brought the people, those baptized and not, those seeking refuge and redress, those seeking their freedom through slavery, those who settled right there in Sussex, those who were sharecropper slaves, farm workers, and now poultry pickers. Farm workers. I want to take us on up that Route 9, you know that Route 9, where only some of us were able to go to the one and only colored high school, Howard. You know that one, where we had separate but unequal, and we were part of that Brown v. Board. My parents, 1954, Leslie Roberts, Jacqueline Dickerson, each coming from that of the Southbridge and East Side community, that based on segregated, restrictive policies. I want us to think about 1954, when my mama graduated from high school and she came down there to Rehoboth Beach to celebrate as a newly minted graduate from that one and only Collard High School. And yet she was confronted with chicken wire in the water that separated the waters from whites versus color. I want us to think about those folks in the strong communities. Some don't even know what that means. And if you don't know what strong communities mean, Google it. And then I want us to come into today's historic victory and give us hugs, loves, and happy feelings of this is our journey into that next day, that new day of that Juneteenth, because all of those experiences were all rolled up into one, to get us HB 200. Now I'd like to share my presentation with you. Are we there? Are we there with our hearts, spirits, and minds? If we can just, did I get the presentation up, Lisa? I'm a little technically challenged sometimes with things.
I don't see it yet.
Do you have it? I didn't load it. We sent it to you to load.
No problem.
No worries. One thing I'm not a techie person, so you all bear with me. And as Lisa is loading it, I want you to think about some things, because well, I'm glad that, see, this is why I knew to start the presentation just like this. What is environmental justice to you? And I don't want to put you all on the spot, but anyone that wish to, this is going to be a very interactive presentation. So if anyone wants to popcorn it, what environmental justice means, and it doesn't have to be that of a, what do you call it, a thesis, but what does it mean to you? If we can advance it to the next slide, and I might not be on this. What is your definition of environmental justice? Anyone? Anyone want to share? And I can call on someone.
Hey, Michelle, it's Chris.
Hey, Chris.
For me, I think it's a broad topic and issue, but I think what's most important is that everybody is involved and treated equally, and not just equally, but given consideration about their past situation and treatment from environmental injustice, so that we're all involved in conversations about reducing pollution and restoring our ecosystems. And I think really the focus on those communities that have had that larger pollution burden over time and have been really discriminated against through environmental laws or the lack of environmental laws. That's, I think, what it means to me.
Okay, right on. Thank you, Chris. Anyone else?
I'll jump in. This is Anna. I see environmental justice as a very active movement in which it's a lot of fighting to undo things that are already in place and kind of trying to tear down legislation and policies that have made the persecution of people through their exposure to poor environmental conditions, to just give them the opportunity to live in a healthy environment and to be healthy and to have domain over their own future.
Right on. Thank you. Can we move on to the next slide? Environmental justice. This is what EPA currently defines environmental justice as. And it's very important for us to understand that this definition was actually changed. This was not I should have put the initial one, and so that can be your homework to look for the initial. But this was the George Bush definition of environmental justice. So when George Bush, the son, came into the White House, it was changed to reflect what his administration thought, and it's remained. That being the fair treatment and meaningful involvement of all, regardless of race, color, national origin, or income, with respect to the development, implementation, and enforcement of environmental laws. But the sad news is that we see that there are very grave disparities, right? Even today, as you all talked about. Now, let's go to the next slide and see what the environmental justice just breaks it down to boom. Right, let's go back up to that. Yes, the environmental justice movement meets up with that of the national enviros and the conservation folks in the 70s, right? And so I'm flip-flopping a little bit here, but I just want to show you where George Bush took us to. But let's go back, though, to where we were. No, I'm sorry, apology. Let's stay here, but let's think about where we were in the 70s, where when we think about when the EPA came on board, and we thought about the conservation of environment and land, right, and air. But for environmental justice communities, that was a time that they equally began to confront environmentalists and conservationists to say, you know, we're hearing from some of you folks that we don't care about the environment, if you will, per se. Whereas environmental justice to us means where we live, work, worship, play, pray, and go to school. And oh, by the way, when you really think about that of conservation, nature, culture, and all of that, the environment was always inextricably linked. That's why we went through that meditation, right? About our connection to water, our birth, our connections to the land, and even those of us as you all are experiencing now in learning about Juneteenth, in us as Black people in America, our disconnect to our land, but yet the immediate connection to this land, to the point that we toiled, soiled, and built this land for that of future generations of your privileged folk. Next slide, please. So where did this national movement of EJ come from? What was all of this? And, you know, here in this slide, you see that many of you, and some of you may or may not, and those of you in Sussex County, I'm sure Maria Payan and others are connected to the struggle in Warren County and parts of North Carolina, given the issues around the corporate agricultural farming issues, the CAFOs and others. But in the early 1980s, and I want to take it back really into the 70s, and this again, for us in Delaware, we can understand the complexities of our North versus the South, and still today, and how we need real healing, right, and understanding. Because of the fact that there was the hazardous waste landfill situation that was happening. But then in the meantime, Warren County and the PCBs, yes, but equally it was a hotbed for racial hostility and racism. So if you bringing it back into the George Bush era, where we started to beat back down on, we're not going to talk about this racism issue and all of these other things, then it began this, and I'm going quick, but we can come back to this and other times if you wish. This is where some of these divisions and schisms began with in Michele's words, of climate, of environment, of conservation, of justice. Next slide, please. So we ourselves began to study, and there were many studies as many people were getting sick and not understanding why. And and even losing crops and fields and all of these pop-ups of hazardous facilities in and around their spaces, highways coming through, such as the I-95 highway that busted up the entire midtown section of Wilmington, thereby leaving that a hotbed, if you will, of hostility. Next slide, please. And then comes the first People of Color Summit, where 1,000 people came together in Washington. This on the heels of the civil rights movement. There were some that even came from Wilmington, right? And they came to lay their concerns and their challenges down. By this point, folks like me, I had finished college and I'm seeking to try to get a job in the great state of Delaware. I had an environmental background. Believe it or not, I'm a wetlands biologist. Couldn't get a job anywhere in the beginning. Most people wanted me to go work for DuPont, didn't want to work for DuPont, began to work for the local governments there. And before I knew it, I'm working in drinking water, hazardous, and all the rest. And seeing the connections that these very people were in Washington on the steps of our US Capitol in 1991, espousing of what challenges were. Can we go to the next slide, please? So then comes the second People of Color Summit, and more people come addressing more issues, and it's creating larger and making the connections to that of international and the globalization. And we can understand that in Delaware, given our political economy. What was it? Gunpowder, chemicals, gunpowder, slavery, chemicals, now banking. Next slide, please. So we saw where the populations that were being disproportionately impacted, when we saw this, that whole movement was the push to then President Bill Clinton to sign the Executive Order 12898 that addressing this disproportionate impacts on people of color and the poor and our Native Indigenous folks. Now, it's very important to understand, as my friend Marta Aguirre from Physicians for Social Responsibility of LA would say, that people of color is very important to make sure that that is included. Why? Because when we think about deed restrictive covenants, economics, and movement flow, in California, Hollywood Hills, they're not drilling for oil in Hollywood Hills. They are drilling in Baldwin Hills. But for those who don't know, Baldwin Hills was created based on the deed restrictive covenants in Hollywood Hills, forbidding that of Blacks to move. And so therefore, although my grandmother's dear, wonderful, unforgettable Nat King Cole, they forbid Nat to move there in Hollywood. Nat had to move in Baldwin Hills. To this day, you can drill in Baldwin Hills. That's why color and income, very important. And we people of color are at both of those disparities at the highest of levels. Next slide, please. So these are the faces of disproportionate impact factors. And as you look it's across the country. As I say, we are in that of the Gulf Coast, Southwest, in Alaska, Delaware. So you see the cumulative impacts that are impacting our culture, our way of life, our way of being, our education. Don't forget Brown v. Board and the fact that we've co-opted our education. And so while we co-opted the education, that does not mean that our culture and our ways of life did not know how to overtake our struggles. Next slide, please. So we have groups within our communities and in Delaware to localize it, the Delaware Concerned Residents. for environmental justice. And this was taken when they had a Martin Luther King action dinner where folks came together and thought and was talking about what does a beloved community look like to me, and began to think about developing that for themselves. Next slide, please. This is our community, of one of our communities along Route 9, and one of a community near and dear to my heart, because this was where my basic childcare was all of my life. This was of my family community. My family were one of the first community residents of Rosegate along what we call, think about it, the Route 9 industrial corridor. You see how we allow for harm to be near certain people. Next slide, please. And these are some of our, every October, we host, and we had folks from Sussex who would come up and join us actually each October. And then COVID came, and our very last one was on water, believe it or not. And we have been a strong supporter to HB 200 from the northern section. Maria Payan and others have always, Keith Sterk, Marlene Saunders, all of those folks have come up and joined with us up in Delaware, as we've equally brought national folks to really address these issues. Next slide. In addition, education, and this is why we said yes, and we're so interested in really wanting to present to Delaware Inland Bays, because these are some of our children, and these young people would, in fact, the young fellow with the book, he would probably kill me right now, because bless his heart, he's now going into 12th grade, and I'm so excited. But imagine working with young people like these young folks, along with our Native, Indigenous brothers and sisters, and and learning traditional knowledge, as well as our family and friends over at Delaware State College, along with you, Delaware Inland Bays. What a joy that could be. That for us to learn about wetlands replenishing and delineation. That's my humble beginnings. And that's one of the things that I always wished and wanted to be able to do with young people. And that actually is one of the reasons why I said yes to you. Next slide, please. So these are some of the reports, and I encourage you to read them extensively, that's already been done in Delaware, where the report on how the Community Involvement Advisory Committee was created out of the Delaware state process, but equally addressing the mitigation pollution in communities. All of these reports were created, and the works done with communities. I happen to participate with these bodies of works because, again, this has always been a very important issue to me for many reasons, not just that of environment, but from public health, from education, from science, from justice, all of that. Next slide, please. And so that said, we provide our communities with the technical resources they need. In fact, with the very last one being, this was from our last event we held, where we entitled our report, Watered Down Justice. So we're very happy to hear about HB 200. And let's take us to the next slide. And because that now brings us on to the works that we're seeing happening in Capitol Hill. Our folks have been on Capitol Hill influencing the risk management program, the environmental justice bill that Chairman Grijalva and Mr. McEachin have introduced in the United States Congress. Equally on the Senate side, our dear fighter Representative Lisa Blunt Rochester, wahoo, she has rocked it out the House with really hearing from communities on the need of addressing air pollution and making sure that there are, there's bills in place to really address monitoring for communities who absolutely need it, and the funding thereof. Equally, these folks are very included in, can we go to the next slide, please? It takes us to they're equally involved in our work stat with the National Equitable and Just National Climate Platform, where we've taken all of these stories and some of our folks, and we encourage you, Delaware Inland Bays, to sign on to the platform, where 13 platform planks have been created by EJ leaders across this nation and endorsed by environmental justice groups, national groups, and others, to really center environmental justice into the core of that of our climate crisis and how we move forward with that. Can we move forward? Because I know we're moving with time. And that then took us to our next slide, please. All of that work took us to Big Papa. And I can only say that to you all because we're home in the great state of our Delaware, where President Joseph R. Biden, you know, bless his heart, and people can say, because the brother knew on one of the reports that we wrote, the Delaware report, we compared his home in Montana, you know, it's very beautiful, and you know his home down there in Rehoboth is very beautiful. As we told people, he doesn't need the White House, he has them in both places in Delaware, right? But with that being said, we compared his home in Wilmington with our communities along the Route 9. We were sad that Bo died, but we got a lot of Bo's dying. We were sad for Bo, but we got a lot of Bo's dying. In addition, we have solutions. And that's what we told Brother Biden. And we are happy to report on July 15th, 14 minutes into his speech, you could tell how we've monitored that speech. He gave a shout out to environmental justice. He didn't just call out the fires in California and Cancer Alley. He finally called out home the issues along the Route 9 industrial corridor. Now, he was still a little bit weak in his Biden plan, we're going to say this, on this CAFO situation. And this is important for us in Sussex County, because with this EJ Biden plan and the EJ for with the Equitable and Just Climate Plan, we said we're not going to leave any communities behind. And we told this to Mr. Biden. And we shared this equally on this White House Advisory Council. Next slide, please. So this is going to bring down this Justice 40 he's talking about. And that's the Executive Order 14008, where we're going to meet, he's looking at how we meet the demands of the climate crisis by centering environmental justice in the center, but equally looking at how we also provide a robust workforce. My friends here across this space here, Vi Wahigi from Alaska, Brother Richard Moore and Steve Taylor, are parts of Environmental Justice Health Alliance for Chemical Policy Reform and our strategic partner, Coming Clean. This is important to us, and important that when these funds, this is why this HB 200 is so important, and you all are spot on to the break of dawn, as Crystal Baynard Norman would say with her rhyme and self, about making sure that these funds are coming down to the impacted communities. I want to show you how much we're in sync with one another, family. Because as we were in the equitable and just climate space and this White House justice space, and actually I'm supposed to be on a call with them right now that happened to come, but after I said yes to you all. But what's important is we let them know that funding should also equally come down to small advocacy organizations such as yours, who are willing, wanting, and committed to being in alignment and right relationship with our communities. You understand? Alignment in right and just relations. And so this is what environmental justice said it means for us. We can't do this by ourselves, family. As Chris and I said, in Delaware, it's complicated. We know that. But the time is now, as you see, our dear beloved Harriet Tubman. You know, we were the state that brought it together. They crossed the line in our state to freedom. We can do this together. We've been separate for a long time. The South and the North, the privilege and the not, back in the shades over there, those people over there, and these people right here. Next slide, please. We're gonna move from injustice to justice. Next slide, please. We have ways of doing so, and we have a wonderful way we would even like to encourage you all to be about with us, with our family and friends, and out with Brother Richard Moore and so Dr. Sophia Martinez in Albuquerque, New Mexico. Wouldn't that be fabulous for us to go back and forth together? But they are doing some wonderful things through the Department of Interior. And this is what Brother Biden was talking about, making this a full federal family approach. They have the first ever wildlife refuge that is on an environmental justice frame. Next slide. These are things that you all can do to support EJ in Delaware. Next slide. I thank you so much. I know we had a short time together. I look forward to us having more time together if possible, but I wanted to be able to leave space for people to have questions or whatever, and I hope I didn't go over my time. And I thank you so very much for your great work, and right on for HB 200 today.
Thank you so much, Michelle. That was fantastic. We do have time for questions. We have a good group here, and I think it's a nice smaller group, so we can unmute ourselves unless you have barking dogs or something in the background, but so we can have a discussion as a group. So I certainly welcome everyone to ask questions, whether it's to Michelle or Chris. The floor is all of yours.
Hi, this is Claire, and thank you so much. It was very inspiring. So what do you see as the next steps for us locally and then maybe more nationally?
Thank you, Claire. Some of the things that I see happening right now as we speak, I'm looking at, listening to you all with your policies, and I know with especially the water piece, I heard you speaking about, it's kind of quirky and weird with that plastic bag piece. I know what you mean by that, but you know, the whole organizing initially, no disrespect, was a little quirky and weird too, because this is where, you know, we really have to look at the cradle to grave piece. That's what EJ is all about. And if we look at the cradle to grave piece and we're willing to stand strong, united, and not let them divide us to take that low-hanging fruit, then it will not allow them to say, oh, well, I'll just give them another plastic bag. It will make them say, we must have paper bags, right? And so those types of things can happen, but that comes from long-lasting relation building. And however, we're at a good political time right now because people are seeking to find one another to build together. And like I said, that Delaware Concerned Residents for EJ group, for example, they meet monthly. And I'm one of the founders of that group. That group was founded like about 7 years ago in the church. And we did that as like an umbrella for a reason, for people to bring it was so divided there, and it's been so divided you know, that was one of my personal challenges with the great state of Delaware. It's so racially polarized and isolated. And so the Episcopal Church of Saints Andrew and Matthew, just very quickly, is a multi-race, multi-ethnic church that's still working it out to try to work it out. And one of the ministries is which we created was that EJHA ministry. But there are other things that you all can do as this Justice 40 is coming out, as it's the Justice 40 plan, the various policies that we see happening locally, the fact that communities are locally pushing to have permitting address cumulative impacts as opposed so that, you know, it's they look at it case by case as opposed to saying, oh, it's the industrial corridor. So you can have just, you know, another permit on top and just you're zoned for that, you know. So there's a lot of different things that you can do, but just starting where you are right there, where you are with your children, the way you work with the schools. As I was sharing with Chris and Miss Dora Williams from Delaware Concerned Residents and also off the Route 9 was saying it would be beautiful to bring, there's children who have never from Newcastle County been to Rehoboth Beach or been down to even know what it means to plant wetlands or things of that nature. And equally, we learn from them, our Native Indigenous brothers and sisters who have been talking about we need to really not, we cannot commodify and own nature. And so we must learn from them as well. So it's all one learning experience. I hope I answered your question and building.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
Are there other questions?
Hey, Michelle, this Chris, this is sort of a pointed question, it's specific, but I'm wondering if you can give us some information on what's going on with the Crota plant up, the situation upstate.
Yes, the Crota plant. That is a very tenuous piece. You know, they have had several incidences there. There is grave hostilities. My understanding, the Crota industry is supposed to be working with DENREC to make the necessary changes that they're supposed to make, if you will, to address the releases that they had. But Crota is actually, it's a little bit larger than that of the localized piece of Delaware. And what I mean by that is the ethylene oxide industry, period. We have found, to make an exceptionally long story short, found a way to locate themselves in what we call cancer cluster communities. And therefore, when there are challenges, there's this whack-a-mole effect that, you know, it's hard to really pinpoint them. In addition to that, there is the medical sterilizing industry, but there's equally that of the creation of the chemical itself, right? And so the processing. And so we at the Environmental Justice Health Alliance are our national collective, and that's part of ways that we are supporting you all here in Delaware. We have been providing Delaware Concerned residents and communities, members along Route 9 with the technical resources that they need to be able to go into these meetings with DENREC, but equally as we are pushing to strengthen the policies that the Trump administration destroyed while there, and especially that of the ethylene oxide piece itself. So it's a very sticky piece. I don't know where they are right now. But I did hear, I think I could be wrong, that they did have like a permit out for, I think it was like a waste treatment expansion piece, but I'm not quite sure. I need to check that for you.
Michelle, I
I
think
do know, if I could quickly say, none of the communities have been medically monitored since that major release. When was that now? Almost 3 years ago. They were told, don't worry about it, they're okay. But none of them, the state health department, no one has, there's no medical monitoring. And the communities are trying to make sure that they can at least get some sirens and, alarms and things of that nature to at least protect them from future incidences. I'll leave it there.
Michelle, I believe Bob, do you have a question?
I do. And Ms. Roberts, I have to admit, earlier in your program, you asked what is environmental justice, and after the last 5 years, I'm not always sure what justice is anymore. So on the larger scale, can you talk? I mean, we obviously have a great division in our country, and I believe it's the divide goes into environmentalism. And on a larger scale, how do you see environmental justice progressing from where it is now? Hopefully you don't see it digressing.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Ennis, Michelle. You can drop the miss. And, and welcome to my world. I was from birth seeking justice. So I'm glad you had it until about 5 years ago. So now maybe we can all get it together, right? In a grander scale. And the good news with all of that is environmental justice, as my brother Richard Moore would say, of the Las Sardinas Institute, and one of the founders of the environmental justice movement, the folks out there in the Southwest, he would say we're a lot further than we ever have been. And what we mean by that is when I danced over that Equitable and Just Climate platform, but I deeply encourage you all to go to ajustclimate.org and really study that website. We have now been in a process for over 2 years where we took some of the national we being some of the environmental justice leadership across the nation, have taken some of our national groups to task on everything from debt to nature land swap, sins of the past of creating these low-hanging fruit policies. You know what I'm saying? These we know it's nice to, like, even the champagne toast of the CPP that might have been for you but wasn't for me, because it was going to include more emissions in our community, even down to when we have these landfills and we get to the end and we decide to, oh, well, I'll just take an average and we'll average out the height of the landfill, and that's going to be our victory. That wasn't a victory, sad to say, because of the fact that when you think about it, you take the average of the average landfill, and all the landfills that are in communities go. So now you done averaged our pain and told us we got a victory. And so but the good news is we had discussions about that for the past couple of years with the CEOs of some of the most well-endowed national groups. Who are those? The Sierra Club, the Natural Resources Defense Council, Earth Justice, the Center for American Progress. Groups like these we have been deeply engaged with, talking about how it is our folks have been sold out, shorted up, or whatever, even down to the disconnects in if you will, in funding in our programs, in hiring, in all of these things. And so we were able to create that equitable and just climate platform that the EJ Voices created, the National Voices endorsed. We've been working together on that. And I'm happy to say that I truly believe, as Richard says, that that is what actually flipped what's happening in Washington right now, to, in addition to the folks who are on the streets, to us really having a deeper conversation about environmental justice. I'll be honest, I would have, as much as I appreciate your works that you're doing, I would have never thought that Delaware Center for Delaware Inland Bays would have called me for something like this. But when you did, and based on where I am in my political walk and spiritual relationship right now, with how we're moving towards racial reconciliation, redemption, and remedy, I said yes. So I hope that answered your question. And I would encourage you to really review that site. And I would encourage Delaware Inland Bays to sign on to that and join us on that journey. And then that's why equally I spoke about Richard Moore, because I really think we can do something, family, in Delaware with folks like you all and up in Newcastle County with the Russell Peterson Refuge. Because I've been back and forth in New Mexico with Brother Richard, with the folks at Las Sardinas and the Valle de Oro, and actually the refuge managers from John Hines and some others, some of these refuge managers now are now meeting to try to figure out how they can pattern what they're doing in New Mexico. Well, Richard is my national co-coordinator with the Environmental Justice Health Alliance and an affiliate member of EJHA Las Sardinas, and we've all been building together up in Newcastle County. And I believe that we can do some things together like that, and the healing through the water, through our children, with one another. That's what we're talking about. And Bob, that's when the justice comes, because it's not just going to come overnight, unfortunately, but this is how it will grow, just like that marsh reed grass, brother.
Michele, I have a question kind of related to what you were just talking about. So what advice do you have for organizations like ours or other groups that want to get more involved in building these relationships and building trust and doing this in a really meaningful and impactful way where we can help be part of the solution?
Sure. I think the first thing, it's important to show up and listen. You know what I'm saying? And just as we're sharing with you, like, and the folks from Delaware Concern residents, that's how we open that space up. It's one of those spaces where you can show up and share, listen and share, you know, and share one another's concerns. And the beautiful part about us doing what we did up at the church, because for us, I mean, I am actually a third generation Episcopalian. And I'll tell you one other thing. I was denied coming to Camp Arrowhead, and I'm salty over it. Well, when I was a kid, they didn't want us down in Camp Arrowhead, and it was one Black church in the Episcopal Diocese, and that was St. Matthew, and that was the church I came from. And lo and behold, I wound up being a wetlands biologist and all these other things without ever experiencing, you know, basically, unless I went somewhere with my parents or, you know, was with family or whatever. But this is where we can begin to just really to show up and listen and learn and be supportive. I think Chris said something about, I remember when that was what is it, the hands across down there at Rehoboth or whatever you all did. This is equally where it's a support to the plastic bag piece, because when you think about that plastic bag piece, it's not just about that beautiful blue heron or whatever, but what about that child that's up there on Route 9 living next to the Croda plant or living next to the refinery, because the plastic is all interconnected to that. So that's the reason why. It's more than, yes, it's about the strangulation of the birds and the you know, and all that's going on in the oceans, but equally it's about the upstream as well, and how it is we address the upstream as well as the downstream connection. And that's where, if we just listen to one another, we can do that.
Thank you very much.
Michele, that kind of gets to something that I've been thinking about as you're talking, and the passion in your voice. You know, with something as big and you know, historically long lasting as environmental justice and so many other issues in our world, climate change, these are all really big things. It's overwhelming, right, for people. And sometimes when things are just so overwhelming, people just, they don't know how to deal with it, right? And then on the other end, for individuals that are so passionate, we run the risk of compassion fatigue. So I'm curious, you know, from your experiences personally, but also professionally, do you have any thoughts on that, or, you know, how maybe you personally dealt with it or engaged with someone? I'm just curious to hear that a little bit.
Sure. That's what I love so much about the Environmental Justice Health Alliance. And again, like our strategic affiliation with Coming Clean. For us, first of all, as I share with you, this work is spiritual. Many of us are fighting for our lives and our homes and our families. And yes, it is overwhelming. And even now with this climate crisis. But we've been saying for years that it is a crisis in our community. And we've been calling the climate crisis. We've been calling the crisis in our community. We've been saying we can't breathe in so many different ways. And so now what it really takes, what we really need, and this is where, you know, for those of you in Sussex, just for you to know, I'm a good practicing Episcopalian, and we've been challenging the church down there. We've been challenging Bishop Brown to really make sure to understand that it is that you can't talk about a climate challenge without talking about environmental injustice. And especially in a space like Sussex County. Especially in Sussex County, where people don't even realize the history of knowing that you were even able to snatch a Black man, woman, and child back out of Wilmington and take them back down to Sussex and put them back into slavery. And that's why some folks you might not even hear being very loud right now. And so this is why we have really, when we're talking about rights and human rights, and I hear folks about the right to water and all these things, but we're talking about our human rights as people. And so when we can honor our human right to breathe for whatever that takes, when we think about whatever that piece of work we're doing, whatever it is, and we think about, like, especially with water, it's oxygen and hydrogen, H2O. It takes oxygen for water to live. So right now, so the works that we're engaged in, if we really think about the continuing nourishing of ourselves and being true to ourselves and truly listening to one another, and truly hearing one another, not trying to get others to just truly hearing. That's a freeing in itself. That will free us up to really be able to even go a little deeper than we may not have been able to go. And we really won't be overwhelmed because we'll be so saturated in love that it will hold us together. That's the importance of knowing the history of the struggles of our civil rights, of our Native brothers and sisters who've been forced migrated into, of our folks who had their land stolen so that we could keep slavery going in other places while some people might want to pop a Corona and keep it going. We got to understand how the market impacts the culture. And it's like the presiding bishop, Michael Curry, says, when we learn to let love run through, just like our brother, Reverend Barber with the Poor People's Campaign, to let love run through, then we will know what it means for our brothers and sisters to be able to breathe clean air, especially now in COVID-19. I hope I answered that for you.
You did, thank you. We have a little bit more time left if anyone has any questions.
Hi, Michelle. This is Ferry. I had a question about the Justice 40 plan.
Yeah.
So with the, how would you avoid competition among communities that need those funding? You know, you hear cities and different communities in California just fighting each other on who gets these fundings, and that creates conflict, but yet we're all affected, not necessarily equally, but we're all affected by climate change and
Right.
injustice currently happening. So how do you avoid these conflicts, and what can the, I guess, Justice 40 do to address that issue?
Well, one of the things that we're working on, it just so happens I'm on the, which I am going to when I leave you tonight, I'm on the Climate Tools Work Group. And the Climate Tools Work Group for the Justice 40 piece is to help us to actually define what it is a disparate community means. In addition to that, there are many EJ communities across advocates and the works that we're doing within the equitable and just climate process. For example, we're working along with folks like the National Black Caucus of state legislatures, right? And our folks like our strategic partners of Coming Clean, who equally are working with folks like the national, state environmental legislatures, right? What does all that mean? It means that these funds are actually going to come to states and localities, right? So we need to make sure that there are oversight structures in place to make sure that these funds get right down to the very least of these. And we're banging up in there to make sure that they do, okay? But we're very strategic equally in with our friends like that of, you saw in my presentation, the Regenesis Project, former state representative Harold Mitchell out of the great state of South Carolina is part of the Equitable and Just Climate platform process and a proud member of the National Black Caucus of state legislatures. We have been working together with them, with local elected officials across the nation, and we have a couple of family friends here. I won't put them on the spot, but one of our star champions here in the great state of Delaware, who I'm sure you all are proud of, is none other than Representative Larry Lambert, Wahoo. And so Brother Lambert and others have been working aggressively and engaged in understanding what this means, but equally how it is exceptionally important to go beyond the pale of community participation or whatever, but straight to community engagement where the community folk will be part of that planning aspect and the oversight itself thereof. Did that make sense, Ferry?
Yes, it did. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I see a hand raised. Richard, do you have a question?
Yeah, I just had a comment. I just wanted to, you know, in talking to Michele and my visits to Delaware, just want to congratulate you folk. And Michelle's been kind of really keeping us up. I'm saying we, EJHA, the Environmental Justice Health Alliance, up on the work and the communications that you all have been having. So I had promised Michele and that I came onto this call as a listener. And I think that the questions that have been asked are very, very important questions. And I just want to lastly to say that from Los Sardinas Institute, the Gardens Institute, and Michele mentioned that in terms of VDO, the Valle de Oro Refuge, National Wildlife Refuge, and I think she flagged in her we're the only federal refuge in the United States or park with an environmental and economic justice strategic plan, and we've been operating within that strategic plan for the last 4 years. So I just wanted to just congratulate you all. Whatever we can, whatever support we can give. Now, when I say we, I'm not only speaking of Los Sardinas Institute. I'm speaking of the leadership, the environmental justice leadership team at the refuge. That's made up with community folk and the Friends of the Refuge and Fish and Wildlife, whatever support that we can give the Delaware Center in terms of getting an understanding and a handle on the strategic plan and the deepness of the strategic plan. We're here to do that. So that's it for me. Again, thank you for allowing me to be a listener on this call. And whatever support, as I say again, that we can give on this end, we'll be more than happy to do that.
Thank you, Richard. And Lisa, yeah, Lisa and Maddie, that could be an excellent next step piece for you all just within your localized organization to be able to invite these folks to even share with you how they went about building with organizations like yours.
Thank you. All right, we have a couple more minutes left. Any last minute questions for Michele? All right, I think that's it. Michele, thank you so much for your time. I want to ask if Chris has any final words you want to say before we head out for the evening.
Thanks, Lisa. Thank you, Michele. I don't have anything to say other than it's really exciting when you start thinking about all the ideas and all the opportunities. And I just want to thank Michele for her time. I recognize how valuable it is, and it's something that we very much appreciate. And likewise, Richard, thank you for being here. And we look forward to continuing the conversation and letting you know about our ideas and what we're doing and finding those linkages. And there's plenty to do. So thank you. I hope you all have a good night.
Thank you, you too.
Take care, everyone. Thank you so much.
Thank you.